Hello to everyone who's joining us. On behalf of Paraclete Press, welcome to this presentation on Celtic spirituality from Christine Valters Paintner. We're so grateful to be able to gather with all of you during this time of separation. A recording of today's presentation will be available later to share with anyone who couldn't join us right now. And we'll also let you know how to get a copy of Christine's Dreaming of Stones, as well as her upcoming collection with Paraclete, The Wisdom of Wild Grace, which comes out this fall. As you know, today Christine will be speaking to us about Celtic spirituality. So poet and Benedictine oblate Christine Valters Paintner writes with a contemplative heart about kinship with nature, ancestral connections, intimacy, the landscape, the unfolding nature of time, and Christian mystics. Her words spark the heart and offer solace and inspiration in difficult times. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today, Christine.
Thanks, Rachel. It's really my pleasure. So welcome everybody to this session. I'm delighted that Paraclete Press invited me to be with you and to share a bit about Celtic spirituality. Today I'm going to share in particular about the practice of thresholds, which I'll speak more about. We'll do a little bit of centering in a minute. I'm going to read a poem. I'm going to talk a bit about thresholds and how that might kind of help us to understand where we are collectively right now. We'll be moving through a bit of a meditation together, and there also will be some time for questions if anybody wants to ask any. So just to say, Rachel did such a lovely job of introduction. Just for anybody who's not familiar with Abbey of the Arts, my work is really rooted in Desert Celtic and Benedictine traditions, and I am a Benedictine oblate myself, and I have a great love of poetry. So what I'd like to do is invite you to begin just to take a few nice deep breaths and just to help yourself arrive here to this space. And I really invite you to let this be a time of sanctuary, a time of retreat, so we can, withdraw all of our attention from all of the news that's going on around us and all of the information that we're trying to gather about what's happening. And we just get to draw our attention back to ourselves and just to rest here in this place. And so taking a few nice, slow, deep breaths. And just beginning to settle into your body. And you might even be aware of how the breath itself is a threshold, taking in the oxygen that you need to nourish yourself and breathing out the carbon dioxide that you release out into the air. And of course, the plants and the trees around us do the opposite, and they take back in the carbon dioxide and release the oxygen. So we're in this kind of life-giving give and take. And you might imagine that you are dropping your awareness down into your heart center. So you're crossing a threshold into this inner sanctuary space. And the mystics tell us that the cave of the heart is the place of connection to the divine, that the divine spark dwells within each of us. And so we get to rest here. We get to be held in this sanctuary inside that means we don't have to do anything in this moment. We get to simply receive and be present. And then just taking a moment to connect to all the pilgrims who might be listening to this recording just now or at another time, knowing that we're connected both across space and time. And then also sending love and blessings out into the world for all the people who might be hurting and suffering right now, people that you know as well as people that you don't know. And then just gathering your attention and your awareness back to yourself, just resting again in that space of the heart. And as St. Benedict writes in his rule, to listen with the ears of your heart for a moment to this poem. To listen with the ears of the heart means to listen in a way that is open to receiving gifts or words that shimmer, just to open up and see what might touch you. And poetry has a way of moving us across the threshold itself, in past that kind of logical awareness that we live in every day, into this deeper, more poetic, imaginative space. So this poem is called Threshold. It's in the collection Dreaming of Stones that Paraclete Press published last year for me. Threshold. You find a place to sit, spine cradled by hazel branches, and finally rest arrives. The grief you didn't even know was there breaks the banks within, so carefully built, and you discover a river inside you. Then follows the sweet stillness, when you gather your strength for what is still to come, when you eat your cheese sandwich on brown bread prepared early this morning, long before you knew how your life might break open in a flash. The way the breeze catches dandelion seeds, and suddenly there is just stem and a shower of shooting stars, and time as your only companion to wait for what is to come. You begin to walk and your sweater catches on hawthorn branches, and you think of a little breathless girl running through a fairy tale forest, except you are no longer running away, but headlong into the council of trees. And you know this moment as a new beginning, with no idea of what is arriving, only for the sudden departure of the burden you've been carrying for a lifetime, leaving instead an unfamiliar lightness as you struggle not to ascend toward the sun. How you no longer need to carry this heavy stone in your arms, on your back, in your throat, and you wonder why you didn't lay it aside long ago, and you see how your curled fingers have become frozen in their grasp. The grass is suddenly more vibrant than you ever remembered, and you're free to gather an armful of wildflowers, gentians with their bowls of sky, buttercup mouths full of sunlight, constellations of Queen Anne's lace. Bees are thick with nectar, and even the stones sing on this wet morning where limestone hills stretch gray into the steel sky, their chorus lingering in the distance. And as the rain falls, baptism doesn't feel so very far away. So we are collectively on a threshold. And the threshold is a space between. It's a space when the old has been released and the new has not yet come into being. It's a portal into something unknown, something that we have not yet anticipated or been able to imagine. And in this, Celtic tradition, the idea of threshold was that it was a very potent place of connection between this world, the world of the material, of the everyday, and the world of the sacred, which was essentially just the world behind this world. So it's not like the sacred is somewhere far away, but that there's a veil between these worlds, and thresholds have a way of helping us to see through and to see the way that the sacred is alive around us. And the Celtic peoples, of course, the Celtic spiritual tradition thrived particularly in Ireland and Scotland and Wales, and of course these are all island places, and so there's a sense even of just the landscape itself being a threshold place. An island is a place surrounded by water, and so there's a sense of kind of that rich sort of borderland all around us. And these monks, these Celtic monks, we're talking about sort of the 5th to 11th centuries, a period when Christianity flourished in Ireland and Scotland and Wales and other places like that, where Christianity that was practiced was more indigenous to the land itself and more in alignment with some of the pre-Christian Celtic ways that really included an intimacy with nature. And so that's, I think, why a lot of people are really drawn to this path of Celtic spirituality, because there is this sense of nature being a source of revelation, which I think many of us find it to be, of course. In fact, there was an Irish philosopher who wrote that there are actually two books of revelation. One is nature, and one is the scriptures. So what are we talking about in terms of thresholds? Well, they can be places. So you might have heard the term thin places, where heaven and earth touch, where they really close together. My dear husband, John, talks about how thin places, maybe they've been worn thin because they're like sacred sites that we go to, that so many people have traveled to, that barrier between heaven and earth has become worn thin, so we can see the sacred more clearly in those places. So if you've ever been on pilgrimage to a sacred site, you know the sense that these places that kind of hold the prayers of people who've traveled there for years and years and years, how that carries that kind of sacred energy and that sacred presence. Think about doorways. Doorways are very much threshold places. When you move from one room to another, from inside to outside, the doorway is really like a symbol of what the threshold place is. And in the pre-Christian tradition, the Druids had what were called threshold stones. So there would be these stones that would kind of be marking the entryway into a sanctuary space, into a sacred place, much the way we do in our Christian churches. And we have often these beautiful doorways. And when we come in, maybe there'll be like a baptismal font as kind of a marking of entering into this sacred space. And then, of course, there are thin times as well. So it's not even just always a physical place that the threshold is. Thin times are moments like dawn and dusk, that turning from darkness to light and from light to darkness again. Seasonal transitions are threshold times. We just passed the equinox, the spring equinox in the northern hemisphere and the autumn equinox in the southern hemisphere. And for this Celtic imagination, those turning points of the year, particularly around the seasons, were considered to be particularly thin times, when that veil between worlds grows thin. You're probably familiar with the Feast of All Saints and All Souls in November in the Celtic calendar is called Samhain, and that is supposed to be the thinnest time of year because that's when the ancestors are particularly present to us. But all of those turning points of the seasons are those threshold moments, significant events in our lives like birth and marriage and death, going on a sabbatical, the loss of a job, the loss of a partner, the loss of a dream. Any kind of loss is often, a threshold time when we are letting go of the old and we haven't yet moved into the new. And so we find ourselves collectively in this threshold place right now where I think for most of us, we feel like this happened very suddenly, this quarantine time, this social isolation time, which I've been referring to as compassionate retreating, as a way to kind of reframe, this beautiful choice that we have made to be in solidarity with those who are most vulnerable, to retreat on behalf of those who would be most affected by this virus that's spreading. And also on solidarity with all of the healthcare workers who are working, incredibly long hours to help keep people safe and treat them as they need. And so the thing about thresholds is, that we can't think our way out of them or plan our way out of them. A lot of us may have had plans for travel coming up or other kinds of plans like that, where all of a sudden those things have all fallen apart and we have no idea, what will happen. Um, of course, if there's, health issues that arise, that has the same kind of disruption in our lives, whether it's during this time of quarantine or other times. Illness is often a threshold season where we're kind of lifted. There's a sense of time outside of time as well. Like we may not even know what day of the week it is these days, because we're in that sort of liminal space where we don't have that kind of connection to the daily. And so thresholds really ask us to lean into more intuitive ways of knowing, into more embodied and instinctual ways of knowing. And we can cultivate these through reading poetry, through listening to music, through paying attention to our dreams, through going for walks and paying attention to the world around us and the way that it is unfolding in this new season. So listening for the signs and the invitations that the season around us might be offering. Those are ways of tuning into this more kind of intuitive connection to things. Excuse me. So the qualities of threshold are uncertainty and strangeness, discomfort, anxiety, unease, unknowing, mystery, all of the things that we probably try and resist on a daily basis. And yet, in these ancient ways of knowing and spiritual practices, the sense was that particularly the pilgrim goes on a pilgrimage and seeks out this threshold space, because it's in that very space of uncertainty and discomfort and unknowing and strangeness that we might have a new encounter with the divine. We might have a new awareness of how the divine is working in our lives. It helps us to break open old patterns and old ways of being, often with a lot of grief to journey with as well. So not to romanticize thresholds as always kind of easy transitions, not at all. In fact, to willingly give ourselves over to this experience, to really acknowledge our vulnerability, is a gift in itself, because it's in that space of vulnerability that we are often broken open for something new, some kind of new awareness. And so we might ask ourselves, what are we becoming aware of in these days, these really difficult, challenging days where we don't know how long it's going to be. We don't know what our financial futures or our health futures are going to be. In that space of the in-between, what are we discovering is most essential to us? What are we discovering is that we cherish the most? What are the things that we are most wanting to hold close to us, whether we're physically able to do that or whether we're just able to hold, people that we love that are perhaps far away. We might have to hold them close through prayer and regular communication and conversation. And I know for myself, I'm really appreciating trying to be very intentional with some of my close friends of making time still to be present with one another and to support one another in this journey. And of course, for those of us experiencing, great loss, when the loss of loved ones, at that threshold, and being present with another as they cross over into that great mystery, that's a very tender threshold place to be. But this sense of the sacredness of it. So I know when my mother died many years ago, quite suddenly, that space of sitting in the ICU with her, with John, my husband, and with some of our family members, and singing to her and anointing her and praying with her, and how in many ways it was the most terrible experience of my life and also the most holy. And I think that's often the sense of this threshold time, is it stretches us apart in ways that we weren't expecting, we might think we're not capable of. And it's also the place where grace can enter in because of that vulnerability, because of that getting in touch with what feels most important and essential in our lives, and really coming down to those basics and asking ourselves those questions. And so this threshold in this Celtic imagination is such a potent place, and it offers us an invitation to really consider um, how we want to be in the world, how we want to show up, how as this pandemic unfolds and as things shift, how do we want to respond? Do we want to be people of kindness and compassion? Do we want to cultivate more space for stillness in our lives? What are the things that we're really longing for? And the threshold really asks us to pay attention to that and to be present to those things. So there's this invitation, this very sacred invitation in the midst of that. And then the other thing I'll say about threshold is that it really is about living in the heart of a paradox, living in the heart of the tension between so much suffering in the world and so much beauty in the world, and holding that tension in our lives. That's something that we have to do all of the time as human beings, to give ourselves over to the grief and to the sorrow and to the suffering and the difficult places that we have to rest in, and at the same time acknowledging and cherishing all of the moments of beauty and wonder and gratitude that we get to receive when we're paying attention. Saint Brigid of Kildare is probably one of the better known of the Irish saints, and one of the stories says that she was born on a threshold, that her mother was straddling a doorway when she gave birth to Brigid. And so Brigid is the patron saint of many things, but patron saint of midwives in particular, because of that birth experience as being a time of being on the threshold, of moving into this world. And so often the midwives will call on St. Brigid to assist with that very primal threshold crossing that all of us have experienced. And Brigid's feast day is on the 1st of February, which in the old Celtic calendar is the feast of Imbolc, which is that very, very, very first signs of springtime, at least here in Ireland, where we have a temperate climate, and the first signs of the earth's awakening. So the snowdrops are often the first flowers, and they're connected to Brigid, and so they're that offer that sense of real threshold time of moving from the slumber and the rest and hibernation of winter into the beauties of the flowering forth. And so that resting into that space, and Brigid invites us to be in that place. So I want to I think I'm going to pause there, just see if there's any questions. I will have more time for questions towards the end, and I am going to move you into a meditation here for a moment. But I just thought I'd see if right now, if there's any questions. I can actually see some of the chat here, which is great. Yeah.
Liz Forrest, she says, shoppers out for essentials wait outside to cross the threshold, only 10 at a time allowed to enter. Could this be called a sacred crossing, waiting with patience at the entryway?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a beautiful example. And that's something I was going to talk about a little bit later too, was just one way to pay attention to thresholds in our lives is to notice all of the doorways that we cross. And I think particularly right now, shopping for our groceries and our essentials has become really a holy act, because we're suddenly so aware of something that we take for granted. And particularly I think the people that work in those shops as well, the sense of what a sacred task that they're carrying out. And so and the sense that, you know, the patience that is required, and we're doing that in solidarity again with people who are vulnerable, that we're giving people the space that they need so that we can help foster this, hopefully this environment where this virus will slow down. So thank you for that, Liz. That's a really beautiful image. And yeah, I would say definitely the supermarket is a holy place.
It's interesting. We have another question that ties into that from Art Gina. He says, can you please elaborate on intuitive knowing during thresholds?
Yes. So intuitive knowing is essentially, a lot of us operate most of our days and our hours from a kind of more logical, linear, rational kind of knowing that's very much sort of kind of in a planning mode or a productivity mode, trying to get things done. We live in a culture that really values that kind of knowing and that kind of that kind of productivity and a value on getting from A to B as quickly as possible, trying to fit as many things in, the multitasking. Intuitive knowing is a very different way of relating to the world, where it's more a sense of like of openness and spaciousness and attending to images and symbols that might come to us. So this is where poetry and art and music can be really helpful. The dream life, paying attention to that. So all of those ways of attending to a different language that's also operating in the world at the same time. And I'd say that the divine, or the language of the divine, is operates at this intuitive level. So we don't often get sort of direct messages from God. Maybe sometimes we do, but oftentimes those invitations that we get come through more symbolic means, through paying attention to images and metaphors. And maybe that'll become a little more obvious when I lead you through our meditation, because I'll invite you into sort of paying attention to words that call to you and images that unfold. And that's what I mean by this intuitive knowing. The other thing is, I teach about photography as a contemplative practice, and I talk about the difference between taking photos, shooting photos, capturing photos, which is all very aggressive language and very much kind of how we move through the world, is this sort of grasping sense. And the difference between that and receiving images as gifts, which is more sort of this open palmed, like attending, awaiting for what actually wants to come to us. And that's also for me kind of the sense of intuitive knowing.
Christine, there's another interesting question here. Valerie Hess is asking, she says, in Judaism, there is often a small Torah reminder that Jews touch going in and out their doors. Do the Irish have anything similar?
They don't, but the little
mezuzah.
The mezuzah, yes, exactly. I love that marking of the threshold in the Jewish tradition. The Irish don't, but the doorway is an important symbol in and of itself, of that inner and outer. And some of you might have seen those half doors on some of those cottages, and sort of that sense of even. I think there's a sense of like having the outside in and the inside out. There's sort of a bit more of that sense of crossing over. But like I said, the ancient Druids had those threshold stones, but there isn't anything that I know of that's kind of a common practice. But I think it'd be a wonderful idea to to create something.
Christine, Joan Wilton would like to ask you a question, if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Joan.
I think her microphone is off.
How can I? Joan, can you turn on your microphone?
Hi, yes.
Hi, Joan.
I must have pressed that accidentally.
Go ahead, Joan.
I don't have a question, actually. I'm sorry, but I'm certainly enjoying the webinar here.
Oh,
good. Thank you. Nice to talk to you.
Also, just to say, I see Judith, who's a dear friend here in Ireland. She says in Ireland, the holy water font would always have been at the doorway. So yes, of course, in churches, the holy water font often does serve that purpose. Although in the older churches, in the early medieval time, the holy wells would have been also that place of baptism as well. But yeah, I love that image of the font as that place of crossing over.
People are asking about Brigid's cross as well, being near or above the door.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you do hang those up. Thank you for reminding me of that. Every year at February 1st, after the Feast of St. Brigid, you weave a cross made out of reeds, which is this very simple, plant rushes that grow. And it's this beautiful weaving in and out, sort of a symbol, I think, of that threshold way of knowing as it is. And then you often hang it up in your home, often over a doorway as a blessing of the home.
Crystal is asking, can there be too many thresholds? She says, I feel like we are inundated with so many opportunities. It's overwhelming.
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. I'd say that we're always moving across thresholds. Every breath can be a threshold. I think part of what we need to cultivate then too is a real discipline of both some interior silence so that we can listen for the thresholds that are really important to us. And then I won't go into this too much at the moment, but another practice in Celtic spirituality is encircling prayer, where you create kind of a boundary or a circle around you to help protect you from that feeling of overwhelm. And of course, that circle that we create around us is also a threshold space. So the threshold you can actually call on that as a way to help sort of protect your own energies from being so scattered and being called out in so many directions, as a way to kind of draw your awareness back in.
Marin is asking, what is the relationship between threshold and dark night?
Well, that would be a long, that would be a whole webinar on its own. The dark night experience is definitely its own threshold experience, and very much the qualities of it, the sense of being called into a space where everything is stripped away, including our images and our understanding of who God is in our lives, and that sense of like that radical surrender and humility and yielding. And it's really only in entering fully into that dark night experience that we ever make our way through it. So I'd say it is a threshold experience, and it's probably one of the more kind of potent. Not all our thresholds are dark night experiences, but dark night experiences are threshold experiences, if that makes sense.
Suzanne's asking, are there thresholds we should or can refuse to cross?
Yes, probably, definitely. I would say that sense of, that circle of protection, I think that there are definitely, moments in time that call us to something that maybe isn't life-giving for us, and that we can choose to stay back. That's always a discernment that we get to make. Although I'd say that every threshold has some sort of grace at the heart of it, no matter how difficult it is. But I think we need to discern for ourselves and protect ourselves from anything that does feel harmful to us. That's a very valid way of, leaning into that.
Sandra's asking, are birds a symbol of threshold in Celtic spirituality?
Yeah, they often are. Of course, in Celtic spirituality, animals in general are very much key sort of symbols of different qualities, and birds in particular. I'm thinking of like the wild goose and swans, and the birds, of course, themselves are symbols of the threshold between heaven and earth, and that flying in between, that sense of the sacredness and being able to travel between worlds, essentially. So maybe we should move into a bit of meditation. I just kind of want to drop us into more of that intuitive way of knowing for a bit, and then I'll be happy to come back to answer if there's a few more questions towards the end. Does that sound okay?
Sounds great.
Good. So what I'm going to invite you into is just a modified version of Lectio Divina, which is a practice of sacred reading or contemplative reading. Many of you are probably familiar with this practice, and if you're not, don't worry, because I'll just be leading you through it. And we're going to be praying with a text from Jeremiah chapter 6, verse 16. And I'll be reading it to you a few times, so you'll just get to listen to it. Don't have to worry about necessarily having it in front of you. And it'll be a slightly modified version in that it's going to move into a little bit of a guided imagery experience towards the end. So I just invite you to take a few nice deep breaths again. And just to help yourself, connect back to your heart. Again, having taken in all this information about thresholds, to again transition back across the threshold into the cave of the heart. So that interior threshold space, that where you can be held and where you can be met and nourished by this divine presence. And just noticing for a moment how it is you're feeling right now, and seeing if you might welcome in whatever visitors there are. There might be grief or sadness or anxiety or fear or joy or hopefulness. There might be multiple visitors at once. And just to give yourself a moment where you don't have to change anything about how you feel. You get to simply show up and welcome in your experience and meet yourself with compassion. It's part of what we do on the threshold, is to really honor whatever is coming up for us and to meet that with kindness and with love. And that helps us to navigate the threshold experience. And then I'm going to read this short passage. I'm going to read it through twice. And I invite you to listen for a word or a phrase that shimmers or calls to you in some way. And so what that means is just listening for a word or phrase that catches your attention, that seems like it might hold an invitation for you, or an image that's just somehow stirring something for you. So listen to these words. Stand at the crossroads and look and ask for the ancient paths where the good way lies, and walk in it and find rest for your souls. Stand at the crossroads and look and ask for the ancient paths where the good way lies, and walk in it and find rest for your souls. So just letting whatever that word or phrase is just echo inside you for a moment. And then listening again. Stand at the crossroads and look and ask for the ancient paths where the good way lies, and walk in it and find rest for your souls. I'm just taking a moment to let that word or phrase that's calling to you just unfold for a moment. So allowing images or memories or feelings to have space within you. So this is kind of that intuitive way of knowing, just making room for whatever wants to arise within you. And then listening one more time. Stand at the crossroads and look and ask for the ancient paths where the good way lies, and walk in it and find rest for your souls. I'm just listening right now if there's any sense of invitation that's coming to you out of these words, this sacred text. If there's any call to a new awareness. And then just holding this sense of invitation and again, feeling yourself resting into this cave of the heart and holding this divine spark, this invitation to you today. And imagining that Brigid, Saint Brigid, is with you. And just taking a moment to notice how she appears to you. The expression on her face, the clothing she wears. And she sits with you in that sort of space of knowing silence for a moment. And you ask her for her wisdom and guidance for how to navigate this threshold time. And you just take a moment to listen for what wisdom she has to offer to you in this moment. And this wisdom might come through words, or it might just come through this kind of knowing presence. And then Brigid extends her hand to you and offers you a gift, a symbol of some kind. And so as she opens her hand to you, just to notice what is this gift that she wants to offer. And take a moment to receive it with gratitude. And consider how this symbol might be speaking to this invitation that you are receiving through your prayer. And then just taking that symbol into your body so that you can embody whatever this gift is that she has given to you. So imagining, if you would, that your body is holding this gift. And for just a moment, you might imagine your body is taking some sort of shape or gesture or just movement that expresses whatever this gift might be. And so again, you don't have to think this through. You get to just drop into your body and notice, how does my body want to respond? How does my body want to kind of take a shape or a gesture, embodying this gift or this symbol, and just noticing what rises up. And then a couple of nice deep breaths and just gently releasing that and just offering your gratitude to Brigid for her presence with you and letting her go and just resting into the silence for a moment, into a few moments of stillness where you don't have to think anything or do anything or plan anything. You just simply get to rest into a moment of Sabbath space. And then 3 really slow, deep breaths. And just let yourself very gently be carried back from this threshold, across the threshold, from this inner awareness back into the room that you're in. And if anyone wants to just add in the chat box either a word that came to you or the gift that Brigid gave to you, it'd be lovely just to see some of those. And maybe, Rachel, if you wouldn't mind, you could just maybe read out some of them.
Look, oh, they're going so fast. A seed, a gift of a leaf, a crocus pushing up through the snow, strength rising. Slow down, shining light, a beautiful egg. The cross and passion tide, a wild goose fluttering its wings, a hot coal, a heartstone, a gift of sweet herbs for healing, a compass of peace, a touchstone where my thumb rests on the word faith, a bird to release, her hand, spring grass, turn our mourning into joy, a bluebird, a rose, a gift of tears. Brigid gave me a cow, a birth transition from womb to earthly life, a heart-shaped stone in response to find rest, a water-smoothed stone and water floating my eagle-spread body, pink salt, a shimmering blue ball, a paintbrush. Brigid is playing a harp in the forest, not a tune, sending vibrations as a way of communicating. A hug, her saying, "Don't be a stranger," with a quick laugh, a nourishing apple, a ring of wildflowers, a book of illustrated holy words, a book of poetry, a shell, a pomegranate, a lantern, a pair of binoculars, a golden ring, a horizon, a basket of fruit and flowers, a stone with a star painted on it, the world held in a heart, the sea, a threshold between water and earth or land.
Those are beautiful. Thank you for that, Rachel. That's amazing. I love to hear just, where the journeys that we take in just a few moments and what kind of comes up. I'm just reminded of 2 little stories about Brigid. One was the cow. Some of you might know that Brigid had a white cow that followed her everywhere, and that gave endless milk. So this cow was just offered milk in abundance, and she was able to nourish anybody that she met. And then another beautiful story is that it's said that Brigid had such a heart of compassion for the suffering in the world that when her tears fell, that they landed on the ground, and out of that, out of the earth grew a fruit tree. It's this beautiful sense of like the threshold of grief being transmuted or transformed into nourishment and delight. So,
Christine, would you mind repeating that Jeremiah reference?
Yes, it's Jeremiah chapter 6, verse 16. I believe the translation that I'm using right now is actually from the Jerusalem Bible, but there's, obviously different translations. And I can send it to you, Rachel, too, if you want to post it with
Okay, that'd be great.
a follow-up. So,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. That's really beautiful. So just a couple more thoughts about threshold, and if there's 1 or 2 questions before we close, I'll also close this out with a poem as well. But just a couple of other thoughts. One is, in monastic tradition, is this idea of what's called statio, which is a pausing between activities. So between everything that we do, there's actually a threshold moment. And instead of rushing from one thing to the next, consider pausing, taking 5 really nice, slow, deep breaths, and just letting yourself be present and be maybe even in the discomfort of being in that place in between, or helping yourself to cultivate the patience of before you jump into the next thing, of just resting into that space. Particularly, someone gave the image of being at the market. That can also be, those times of waiting can also be really potent places just to connect with our breath and to be really present, and just to hold a heart of openness to the unknowing and the discomfort that can bring. The other thing you could do, which might be a fun creative exploration for those of you who are able to get out of the house for a walk, or you can even do this in your own home, is to meditate with doorways. So you might begin with the doorways in your own home, doorways between rooms, the doorway outside. If you go on a walk, paying attention to gates and doorways and other thresholds. And if you have a camera, you could bring that as a way of helping you to kind of focus on those moments and receive them as a gift. And then to come back and reflect on all these different images of doorways, and what might they say to you about the threshold that you're on? How does the visual image of a doorway kind of help to bring about any kind of new awareness for where you are?
That's interesting, Christine. Jody is asking, can you speak a little more to letting go, especially in terms of anger, when we have to let go of things we hold dear before stepping through?
Yeah. Well, I would say that it's important. What I'm not advocating that we bypass the difficult emotions. So I want to be clear about that. We really, this threshold time is about honoring the grief, the anger, the fear that comes up in a compassionate and loving way. Like that dark night experience, it's only through experiencing those that we actually come through to wherever the threshold is bringing us. So one of the things I think is really important to do particularly during this time when there's so much unknowing and grief, that we give ourselves time each day to have like a window of time when we really allow ourselves to enter into grief or anger. Sometimes I find music and dance can be really powerful containers for that, ways of holding that. And you let that be its own little threshold moment in your day where you give yourself full permission to have that experience and that exploration. Because I think it's only by allowing that to unfold that we experience any kind of grace out of that. It's giving honor to the losses that we're experiencing is really important. So, are there any other questions before we move?
Kathleen O'Toole says, it just occurs to me that this connects to the Benedictine practice of statio. Would you say something about that?
Yes, well, that's what I was saying exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that is the Benedictine practice of statio, of pausing regularly at different moments, whether it's between our activities or whether it's when we're waiting in line. It's bringing a reverence and an attention and awareness to those moments when normally we might be bored, or we might be checking our phone, or we might be distracting ourselves. It's a way of cultivating a presence to the discomfort. It's really, threshold invites us into that place of stretching us apart, the strangeness, the discomfort, the disorientation. Again, it's in service of breaking us open to something new. But that process it's a challenging one, and we have to be present to the grief that is entailed as well. So not to think that we're trying to avoid that.
Jennifer is asking if you could do another offering sometime about encircling prayer.
Well, what you can do is, if you go to my website, abbeyofthearts.com, And we just finished a 9-day novena where I did an hour session like this every day, and they were all recorded. And the first day was on encircling prayer. So that's actually available to you to register. I can send you the link for that, Rachel, too, if you want to include
good.
that.
Okay,
So
great.
people are welcome to do that. It was a free offering as well. So.
A while back, someone was talking about the idea of a labyrinth and setting a stone, back when you were talking about stones, and that's another thing people could do from home as well during this time, probably.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Labyrinths are very potent. Again, that sort of image of the threshold space of, walking in different directions and not knowing where you're going, but just holding that heart of openness.
There's a question from Susan Butler Jones. Are you familiar with North American indigenous practice of a sweat lodge?
I'm familiar with it. I haven't experienced it myself and wouldn't be able to speak too much in depth about it, but that, is a similar way of accessing that kind of intuitive knowing, from what I understand, is it's a way of sort of dropping out of the kind of everyday consciousness into a different way of seeing.
Lovely.
So, shall I read our closing poem?
Yes, please. That would be great.
Great. So this poem comes from the collection that's coming out this fall, The Wisdom of Wild Grace, and it's called You Are Here, and it was inspired by one of the poems from the poet Rainer Maria Rilke's Book of Hours, which he wrote in response to spending some time in a Russian monastery. And it's really about calling on different images of the divine. You are here. You are the now and not yet, the darkened dawn just before the first rays rise, and you are the rays that pierce and prod. You are the siren screeching through city streets, dropping me to my knees in prayer. You are the lilac and the dust, the refugee's body found on shore with empty pockets. You are the wound that does not heal, the salve, the bandage, and the raised scar that remains. You are the dandelions growing through concrete cracks, the mirror smashed into pieces, the mosaic created. You are the vigil for my mother dying. You are the steady beep of the heart rate monitor and the long tone that makes me wail. You are the ash from the burning towers, the great gashed tree felled by storm, now moss-coated and silent. You are the gray headstone and the red bird that lands and sings, the gaunt face I ignore while rushing down the street. You are the old man's spectacles and the love letters from his wife, now gone. You are thick grime, a sob stuck in the throat, the voice long silent, speaking once again.
Thank you so much, Christine.
Thank you, Rachel. It was really a delight.
Thank you for all of you who joined us, for all the questions. Christine's books are available from your local booksellers, from the Abbey of the Arts, and of course from paracletepress.com. And you can also pre-order Christine's poetry book that's coming out from Paraclete this October, The Wisdom of Wild Grace, from Amazon. So I'm going to post that link now. And we hope you enjoyed this talk as much as we did. Our prayers are with all of you for health and safety during this time, and we hope you'll join us for more of these times together with our authors. Our calendar of Zoom events is available on our website, paracletepress.com. So thank you again, and God bless you all. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. Bye-bye.
Bye.